preservation of and increased access to the 92nd Street Y Humanities Audio Archives is generously funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Tonight's program is a discussion between Kati Marton, author of the new book Hidden Power, Presidential Marriages That Shaped Our History, and Lesley Stahl. You all know Lesley Stahl as a CBS News White House reporter. She covered 3 administrations, Carter and Bush and Reagan. Before she joined 60 Minutes, she hosted a show called Face the Nation with Lesley Stahl. She's the author of Reporting Live, a memoir published by Simon & Schuster in 1999. She has a large collection of Emmys for her interviews on Face the Nation and 60 Minutes, and she won the Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University Journalism Award in 1996. Please welcome Lesley Stahl.
Hello. Oh, blinding lights. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Kati Marton is a journalist and a novelist, a riveting storyteller in both genres, an excellent, elegant writer. She has been an ambassador of goodwill for our country, a tireless defender of reporters' rights and safety around the world as head of the Committee to Protect Journalists. She also serves on the board of the International Rescue Committee, and she is about to take a new assignment at the UN as the UN's advocate for children in armed conflict. She has also raised 2 delicious children of her own who are smart and good kids, and she is a great friend, and I speak from personal experience. And she herself is a good kid, as you are about to find out. And she's married to Richard Holbrooke, which of course will be at the very center of my interrogation of her tonight. No, as much as I want to know everything there is to know about her and Richard Holbrooke, we will actually be discussing her book, Hidden Power, because the study of presidential marriages, even more than that of her marriage, is one of the most interesting subjects there is. How did those wives change history? Some of them have wanted us to know how. Most of them have tried to keep that hidden. And how central is a happy marriage to a successful presidency? I can't wait to find out what Kati has to say. So please welcome Kati Marton. Woo. Don't fall in your chair the way I just did.
Thank you.
Well, I've read it, and you won't put it down, because as I said, there is nothing more interesting. And I'd love to start by asking Kati to give us an overview. You went from Edith and Woodrow Wilson all the way up to Laura and George W. Bush. What generalizations can you make about the centrality of marriage to a presidency?
Well, first of all, Lesley, I'd rather start talking about my marriage. Can we just...
Excellent.
You have some nerve.
So polite.
No, I'm so happy to be here with my dear friend Lesley. That this is the interview I've been looking forward to most. I've been to I believe 15 cities in the last 6 weeks, and this was really the dessert at the end of the whole thing, because not only because this is the ultimate platform, but she really is the ultimate interviewer, and I feel very privileged both to have her as a friend and a highly respected colleague. So to return to the question, I've become very good at deflecting questions.
Yes, we noticed. We noticed.
Glad you asked that. Now let me give you a different answer. So the common thread. I write about 12 marriages, as Lesley said, from Wilson to Bush the Younger, and indeed there are some common threads. The ones that we have to leave Laura and George W. aside for a moment, because in so many ways they are exceptions to so many of the rules. But I'm sure we'll get back to. I'm sure we'll return to that subject. But by and large, these are very stable unions. And in fact, many of these presidents choose their spouses with the promised land of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue somewhere consciously or subconsciously in mind, which is not to say that there isn't a strong emotional connection, but they do know where they want to end up, and they do know the sort of person who will help get them there. Certainly Franklin Roosevelt knew that Eleanor, the favorite niece of then President Teddy Roosevelt, had the presidency in mind when he proposed to Eleanor. Certainly Lyndon Johnson had it in mind. Dick Nixon started proposing the minute he laid eyes on Pat. By the way, as did LBJ. Jack Kennedy, who didn't get married a minute sooner than he absolutely had to, when it was clear that he was going to be the family's chosen one to run for the presidency. And even, you might be surprised at this, even George and Barbara Bush had, yes, I quote Barbara Bush as saying, the year after she left Smith College, where she had spent only 1 year, that she was going to be First Lady someday because her George was going to be president. So these are singular.
Did she tell him?
I think, between the elder Bushes, most things were understood. I don't think he ever actually proposed to her. They just knew that this was in the cards. It was, this very high WASP thing where you don't say anything that's consequential. everything is understood. So, am I answering your question? They start off knowing what they want, and they find the person who will get them there. That person can't be someone who will drain a great deal of emotional energy from them. That person can't be someone who will upstage them. Oh, by the way, I forgot to add to that list of people who had the White House. Yes.
I was waiting for the big C.
Yeah, the big C. Bill Clinton, of course, had the White House in mind when he proposed to Hillary. Okay, so a person who will not take the limelight away from them, a person who will not quit on them. No divorces have ever followed the White House.
Either in or after?
No. And I don't think we're going to have one now.
No. I interviewed Laura Bush. I can promise.
Yes.
Here's something I've heard. Do you agree with those historians who believe that the White House is good for marriage?
Absolutely. Yeah.
That it actually makes marriages better?
Yes.
And why is that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, they are in daily contact, many of them, for the first time since their courtship. They are thrown together. It's not easy. This is no surprise. It's not easy being a politician's wife. And in the White House, there is a kind of an equality because we, the American people, have such high expectations of the First Lady's role. It's almost as prestigious a role as the presidency. So a president, we can talk about this. We can. It is. I mean, we have we're so attached to that role. And we have such deep historic memories that go all the way back to Dolly Madison, rescuing George Washington's portrait from British fire. We have expectations of the First Lady that the president has to take into account. And even a president as macho as President Kennedy, who really had sidelined Jackie while he was in the Senate, had to take her into serious account and was astonished at the impact that this young wife of his, 31 when she was First Lady, a fact that never ceases to amaze me because she handled the role so impeccably. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Anyway, there's equality. There's equality there in the marriage that oftentimes wasn't there before.
You said something that made me remember a story about Barbara Bush. at the very beginning of, this is obviously Bush Sr.'s presidency, she invited a small group of reporters in for lunch, and I was fortunate enough to be one of them. And she took us out onto the Truman balcony, and then this little window right next to the balcony. And she said, you know, I can see right into the Oval Office from here. And George knows I can see right into the Oval Office from here. And she basically, in effect, told us she hasn't been that happy keeping her eye on him in years and years. But guess what? Clinton made it so that there's an obstruction. Because I interviewed Laura Bush. I said, can you see into the Oval Office? She said, no, I can't. There's an obstruction there. She said, my mother-in-law told me, but I can't.
But the greatest...
Great.
Barbara Bush is not what she would like us to think she is. She is one tough lady. And I interviewed a lot of people who crossed her, and none of them ever recovered, basically.
You said this. I want to ask you about the influence of the women on policy, but first, you alluded to this. And when I read your book, it really jumps out at how many of these couples had really strong, great marriages.
Yeah. Well, first of all, they both have to love politics to get there. Again, we will
Well, you had some who didn't love politics, but they still liked the Truman. She didn't like it, but...
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, Lesley. You have to reread that chapter. She did love it. She did love it.
Why'd she keep leaving?
Because she liked doing politics like a ma and pa store. She did not like what she called the rigmarole of the White House. And she was very resentful of all the layers of people she had to go through to get to her husband. Because in the Senate, they really had done their ma and pa thing. At night, he'd come home with a briefcase full of stuff, and the two of them would go through that stuff. And I was astonished at how much he respected her political judgment. And these couples always speak in the second person plural, like Barbara Bush sometimes slips and says, when we were president. Well, Bess, that's how they think of it, because it is a shared enterprise. But Bess Truman, I quote her as saying, we've been in politics for 40 years and more. So she enjoyed the game. She just didn't like the formality, the ceremonial stuff of the White House. That's why, and she was not a woman to mask her displeasure from her husband, who was the sweetest and most long-suffering guy.
Well, she was mean.
I call that chapter The Good Husband, because he gets my maximum 4 stars for being the eternal suitor to this very gruff lady. But he saw her at the end of their life the same way that he saw her when he first glimpsed her at age 6 in Sunday school, as this athletic blonde girl. Always carried a picture of her in his wallet of how she was. That for Harry, Bess stayed that way.
When you read this book, you will walk away saying, my word, so many of them stayed in love with each other. Right from Edith and Woodrow Wilson, the Reagans. These are really strong marriages for the most part, and then you have a couple of exceptions.
Yes.
Who do you think had the best marriage of your group?
Well, the best marriage doesn't necessarily make for the best presidency. I think
talk about that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Well, many of the qualities that make for a good husband don't necessarily translate into a great political leader. For example,
Bill Clinton.
Well, yes.
But go ahead. But you weren't good. Go ahead.
Yeah. You were putting him in the good husband category?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. Right there, right solid. You were going to say
Jerry Ford, for example, was a wonderful, supportive husband. Never tried to temper Betty's outrages. And Betty talked about things that no first lady ever, least of all a Republican first lady, had ever talked about. She talked about, she became the great truth sayer, which after 7 very artificial Nixon years, the country was really hungry for. And she understood that, and she talked about her children's marijuana use, the fact that they were probably having affairs. I'm sure those kids were thrilled to hear Mom talk about that on 60 Minutes.
Morley Safer.
To Morley Safer, yeah. Talked about her addiction to painkillers. Talked about
breast
her
cancer.
bout of, yes, which a
First
huge
time.
taboo, yeah. And Jerry watched this interview with Morley and said, "Honey, you've just lost me 10 million votes." And they kept watching, and it was getting worse. And then he said, "Make that 20 million," and threw a pillow at her. I mean, that was as severe as his judgment. Well, of course, he wasn't reelected, but he sure was a good husband and very, very supportive of all her ailments and problems and so on. So an adorable guy, but you know, there's something about the presidency that requires a level of narcissism and self-absorption and need of you know, plunging into that crowd, that, you know, that need that we saw Bill Clinton and are still seeing express, and we don't see that in our current president. I don't want to mess up your. You
No,
probably
go
have-
ahead.
yeah,
No,
okay.
we're with you.
We don't. You know, I think in shall we call him 43, and so that we don't have to keep giving all those initials and things. 43 is not doesn't appear to need that public affirmation, and I think they have a very strong marriage. It's a very bonded couple,
Very.
and they really don't seem to need other people very much, unlike, for example, the Roosevelts, who were never alone. I think you could count on the fingers of one hand the number of times Eleanor and Franklin dined alone in the White House. And by the way, when you were speaking about Bill Clinton blocking Hillary's view to the Oval Office, that's nothing compared to what FDR did. FDR moved his chest on chest against Eleanor's bedroom door, the door that separated his and hers. So that was pretty blatant. And yet, Franklin Roosevelt was one of our greatest presidents who shepherded us through the 2 greatest crises of the 20th century, the Depression and the World War II. So being a good husband and being something other than a needy narcissist does not automatically make you a good leader or a good president, which is why it was very interesting. I was with Lady Bird when Hillary Clinton gave that famous interview on the Today Show to Matt Lauer, in which she launched the notion of the vast right-wing conspiracy. And Lady Bird was just horrified at the whole idea of investigating a president's, a sitting president's sex life, and obviously reflecting some of her own vulnerabilities there. But she said to me, you know, we will all lose if we choose our presidents according to how they behave toward their spouses. What we want from a president is how he will behave to each and every one of us. And if we make their personal lives the ultimate test of their capacity, then we're going to, and I think I'm quoting as directly as I can muster, we are going to narrow the list to not necessarily the best people.
You know, it's fascinating because we sometimes learn big lessons from scandals, and they may be the wrong lessons. And the big lesson we had learned from Watergate, and when I say we, I mean the press really, was that character meant everything. And if we could do reporting on the character of these men, well, then we'd be better able to predict how they would serve in office. And it may have absolutely been the wrong lesson, based on what you're saying and based, I think, on what I've observed over the last 10 or so years. And we continue to cover character as though it's the most important thing we should tell the public in a campaign.
Well,
it isn't.
yeah, I mean, character. I mean, Nixon was utterly faithful to his wife. So if you mean, but he had I think a rather disturbed character.
But faithfulness is considered a huge, and perhaps again we're wrong, but it is considered central to character.
Well, we can discuss and debate that, but I mean, again, FDR wasn't faithful. Right,
that's what I'm saying. We may have gone a little astray here. Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love to take you through some of the specific chapters. This book starts off like a house on fire with Edith and Woodrow Wilson. And I must say, of all the presidents you talk about here, this is the one I knew least about. I knew that she had tried to cover up his illness and basically ran the country for a while. What I didn't know, and what I found totally delicious, was how oversexed he was.
Yes, who would have thought Woodrow Wilson,
with those little glasses, the college president? Tell us about that. Let's get right to it. Come on.
By the way, you're not alone in that. Teddy Roosevelt said that Woodrow Wilson had all the appeal of an apothecary clerk. And
but look what you uncovered in this book. Whoa.
Well, I call that chapter Fools for Love, because indeed they were. Woodrow Wilson, of course, fell in head over heels in love at age 59 with this rather voluptuous widow lady, Edith Galt.
His wife hadn't died that many months before, right?
He proposed to Edith 6 months after his wife's death. And this was the eve of World War I. And the White House is not a great place to fall in love, especially not on the eve of a war. And his need of Edith was such that he immediately started training her to be his junior partner and made the presidency seem pretty easy. Even taught her how to read his secret code to his special envoy to Europe, Colonel House, the famous Colonel House. And so that when the love letters that you refer to really are steaming. I mean, they're just
actually
so
what
torrid.
I refer to is his saying that he could not spend one day without having sex. I even thought it applied to his first wife as well.
Yes.
That if he couldn't be with his wife every single day, he just was going to stray because he had to have sex at least once.
He called it the imperious powers overtook him. It's kind of like, it's not me, honey, it's the imperious powers. What can I do? It's like I quote Kennedy as saying to Prime Minister Harold Macmillan in the middle of Berlin. No, it was the Cuban Missile Crisis. How is it with you, Harold? With me, if I don't have sex for 3 days, I get a splitting headache. And Harold Macmillan, who was this very dour, dignified Englishman, just didn't know what to say.
But that's what I thought Woodrow Wilson was like. I was wrong.
Yes, no. Woodrow Wilson was much more like Jack Kennedy in that regard. That sex was very important. Who would know that?
Talk though about how she really did end up running the country, because that was. We do know about that, but of course you've done
it is. I think it's
deeper.
the single most astonishing chapter of the American presidency, how a woman with 2 years of formal education, who, by the way, was totally opposed to women getting the vote, absolutely closed down the White House, drew the curtains, and one by one eliminated all of President Wilson's closest aides, because she was a very jealous woman and she didn't want anyone else to have his ear. And in a historic period, and we're not talking about weeks, we're talking about nearly 2 years.
Stunning.
I can't say she governed, because governance is something more complicated, but she did keep the illusion of the presidency going, and
how did she keep his illness secret because
Well, in those days, of course, we didn't have Lesley Stahl covering the White House. We had a very respectful gentleman's club that was spoon-fed by Edith.
But it wasn't just the press.
Well, the press was the first barrier, but then she forbade his cabinet from meeting because she thought that if they met, that would be an act of disloyalty. And this was obviously before the 25th Amendment, which automatically shifts power in case of presidential illness to the vice president. So obviously this couldn't happen anymore, but it couldn't happen for other reasons as well, and that is that the kind of scrutiny that the couple are subjected to now would preclude an Edith Wilson. But when a congressional delegation, which Wilson called the Smelling Committee, came to inspect him, she like a Hollywood director, she choreographed this amazing scene that I described, with a bed in a dark corner of the upstairs bedroom with a shawl artfully draped over his. He was half paralyzed, so his paralyzed side was covered up, and Edith stood there like a sentry and wouldn't let the two senators get anywhere near him, and somehow she and her husband pulled it off, and he even came up with a rather witty line. President Wilson, in his semi-comatose state, came up with a witty line when one of the senators said, "Mr. President, we've been praying for you, sir," and he said, "Which way, Senator?" So, and that was the line that made the news. So obviously the president was still in control of his faculties if he was able to quip like that. So
one of the things that intrigues me about the power of first ladies is that if they are openly powerful, if they exert any kind of authority in any kind of brazen way, the public turns against them. Mm-hmm. Even in the age of feminism, we will not accept this.
No, Hillary learned that the hard way.
But Rosalind?
Yes, Rosalind, yeah. Actually...
even Eleanor.
Yeah. Well, Eleanor, we gave Eleanor the country. We weren't around, unfortunately. The country ceded much more ground to Eleanor simply because it was war, and women were, you had Rosie the Riveter, and women were doing extraordinary things. So that gave Eleanor a greater margin. But when she made the mistake, which of course Hillary also did, of taking an actual job in her husband's administration, in Eleanor's case working for Fiorello LaGuardia in the then equivalent of the Office of Homeland Security, which was called the Office of Civil Defense, Eleanor was pilloried in the press and forced to resign, and went back to doing what was really her greatest gift to the nation, which was as her husband's moral voice.
I find this just a stunning thing, because the public, without leadership really, we just in some very communal way rise up against unelected power. Mm-hmm. And we won't have it.
Yeah.
And when these women try to grab it, we regurgitate it, and the more subtle ones, like Nancy Reagan,
yes.
we accept it.
Yes.
Because it's behind the throne.
It's almost a don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
They don't want us to know to what extent they share it, and we frankly don't want to know either. If you need to share it, okay, but just don't grind our faces in it. Yeah, but in fact, the most important role that these presidential spouses have played is internal in the marriage, not the formal institutional role, but what they do for their partners. I'm trying to be sort of gender neutral because I strongly feel that in our lifetime we will have a first gentleman, and so I'm.
Well, I can't wait. I'll have to go back and cover the White House for that one. we'll talk about that. I've always been very interested in whether these women go in there and actually influence their husbands on policy, and which ones did it, and did they all do it, and how has it changed history?
Well, it absolutely has. It's really the exception when they don't shape policy. And well, we've talked about Edith running the country, and of course Eleanor's role is difficult to overestimate in terms of persuading FDR to do more for the disenfranchised, for African Americans, integrating them into the military, for well, her greatest failure, but not for lack of trying, was to attempt to lift the punishing quota against Jewish refugees, and she butted up against Breckinridge Long, the anti-Semite in the State Department, who ran that policy, and Roosevelt was not at his best regarding this whole issue. It was not his finest moment, so we know that Eleanor played, and of course going down in the mines and being the morale booster of the troops, living under Hitler's bombs in London, and going to the Pacific, and the daily column that she wrote was a tremendously important part of the Roosevelt administration, because she somehow made the White House seem like an ordinary household to millions of Americans who then, as we are now, were living through extraordinary uncertainty, and Eleanor's steady, plain, unpretentious voice was
unpretentious voice.
Yeah, well, yeah. Do you mean the quality of her voice?
I mean that sort of New York.
Oh, yeah, but she had no. Yeah, but she couldn't help that. Look, she was born into that. But she had no sense of entitlement. This was a woman who always flagged her own cabs, who carried her own suitcase. She never even let the White House elevator operator run her up and down. I mean, she liked to do things for herself. And her writing very much reflects that simplicity. You know, Hillary tried to write a column also, but it somehow didn't
have that voice, that strong voice. It didn't
have that voice. But then, you know, we don't think of Jackie Kennedy, for example, as having had much of a substantial role in the. But I disagree with that. I think she really, because so much of the Kennedy presidency was about style. I mean, style was their substance, and she really set the mood and the tone, and of course came up with the label which stuck, Camelot. But
she did so much for the arts.
She made the White House. You know, the White House was full of second-rate stuff in those days, repros and bad art, and out it all went under Jackie. And she sought out the best in the country, and would make the calls herself, and would shame people into. She had a wonderfully irresistible, seductive way of getting people to do things. Without their knowing that she was doing that.
Now, don't jump ahead, because one of the very best chapters, of course they're all good, but one of the very best chapters is the Truman chapter, and you've already alluded to what Kati found out, which was how much of a partner she was.
Yes.
But talk about that, but also, I mean, I actually cringed at how brutal she was to him, and how he suffered when she was mad at him, which seemed to be almost all the time. And he would just curl up in a little ball and whine, "Oh, Bess," and she'd leave, and she and her mother would huff off.
Yeah. Her mother, by the way, never addressed him in the He lived in the White House, Mrs. Wallace. What a piece of work. She was really the mother-in-law from hell. She just, to the end of her days, thought that Bess could have done better.
He's the president.
Because Bess grew up in the big house, quote unquote, in Independence, and Harry grew up under modest circumstances.
But here you have the leader of the free world. He takes
Yes.
over. He's running World War II.
Yeah.
He does the Marshall Plan. He drops the bomb. He
State of Israel.
State of Israel.
Yeah.
He defeats Dewey, and he is being henpecked like nobody you have
Yeah.
ever read about.
Yeah.
How does this go together?
Well, he is first of all he was one of the accidental presidents. Along with Ford, he became president when FDR died. So I think that makes a difference, because Harry and Bess were not strivers like so many of the others. They didn't have this single-minded focus to which everything else was subordinated. They raised a very good daughter, unusual for the record for presidential kids is not great, because everything is secondary to that focus. But with the Trumans, the presidency came to them, and of course he astonished the world with his stunning performance. And I maintain that she played, despite her gruffness, she played a big role in that presidency, in that she anchored him to his Midwestern values. And when she was there, she had a very calming influence. And because he was apt to fly off the handle and could write letters that should not have seen the light of day, and Bess was always fishing them out of the mailbox and tearing them up. But if he didn't get a letter from Bess, he was, I tell the story of several days running when President Truman didn't have a letter from Bess, who was of course back with her mom in Independence, and he stormed into the White House mailroom and said, "If you all don't turn up a letter from Mrs. Truman, you're all fired." And when the president tells you that, you
find the letter.
Yeah, it's pretty serious stuff.
Here's what I liked about the Kennedy chapter. You say that the marriage was getting better.
Yes, most definitely. That's I think that the intensity of those 3.5 years that they had in the White House with so much pain, he was rarely without physical pain himself. We now know about his dramatic medical history, and they lost a child. There was the humiliation of the Bay of Pigs, the snub in Vienna from Khrushchev, the Cuban Missile Crisis. They really, Jackie said that in the White House they were cut off from all the world but each other. And of course, we tend to think of them as these two separate constellations, but in fact they were forging something like a real marriage, which, by the way, does not for a minute imply that he stopped being interested in other women, but he didn't really connect that to his marriage. It was what Papa Joe raised him to be, sadly, and I'm sure that for his wife it never ceased being painful, but she too was raised by a father who was, quote, that sort of man. So I think she kind of thought that men were like that, and sad to say. But I think there was when you look at, I have a picture of the two of them holding hands, something they were both allergic to public displays of attention, of affection, sorry. But this is a very poignant picture after they lost Patrick, of them coming out, and they look really, God bless you, they look really
together.
Yeah.
Unified.
Very
In their sadness.
authentic emotions, which is part of the reason that she, who hated campaigning, accompanied him on that fateful trip to Dallas.
Well, it's a poignant part of the book, because they're coming together, and then at that moment,
and then
it's Dallas.
Yeah. And by the way, just to return for a second about the substantial Jackie, which we rarely credit her with. Her final letter from the White House was to Nikita Khrushchev, which I run in the book, pleading or urging Khrushchev to continue the dialogue with the West that he'd begun with her husband, and urging him to pick it up with the new President Johnson. And I think that's pretty impressive for somebody who was, deeply in deep mourning, to be writing to the head of the Communist Party.
I'm going to give a little plug for 60 Minutes. This coming Sunday, I have a piece on LBJ and his tapes, the tapes he made.
Amazing.
His phone calls, and Jackie's on the tapes, and you wait till you hear her voice. She's 31 years old, but she has the voice that is tinier and sweeter and softer than my daughter's, who's 24, or than your daughter's, she's even younger.
Yeah.
It's the most demure little girl voice.
That breathless little girl, and men and women alike found that irresistible. And of course she knew that.
Well,
but the LBJ tapes are. I look forward to your piece. I start the chapter on the Johnsons with one of those tapes, which I think reveals so much about the dynamic between Lady Bird and Lyndon, and her singular ability to manipulate him insofar as anyone could into good behavior.
Well, that chapter, the thing that I'll never forget is how much he bullied her.
Yes.
He was
very
quite
abusive.
cruel to her.
Yeah.
She was an abused wife and had all the symptoms of an abused wife.
Well, you see, I don't quite agree with that. I think that
I got it out of your book.
You did. But she never lost. She was never a doormat the way Pat Nixon was. She never lost her compass. She never lost her dignity. He was an outrageous bully, and I interviewed Clark Clifford for that chapter, and he describes a terrible evening spent in the upstairs residence where LBJ is just berating Lady Bird for wearing this ugly yellow dress until she finally flees the room in a flood of tears and comes back wearing something else. But he was an equal opportunity abuser. He abused his staff. I mean, the way he talked to Jack Valenti was no better, and Lady Bird.
Of course, this does not forgive it.
No, I'm not trying to. I'm not trying to excuse that behavior, but I'm just saying that Lady Bird was not crushed. Her spirit was intact at the end, and I find her so impressive for her combination of humanity and steel. I just think she's and look, his LBJ's legacy is still controversial and tied up, and now we're revisiting his Vietnam legacy. But hers is absolutely crystal clear. I think she is the most admired former First Lady we have. Lesley, do you think we should turn to
I was going to say, we have to race along because we want to take questions, but I have to ask one more question before I turn it over to you. And we're going to skip over the Nixons, really. We're going to skip over the Carters, but let's quickly just get to the Reagans, because to me, this is one of the most fascinating relationships probably that ever occupied the White House. Edith Wilson hid her husband's illness and exerted power from behind that. Did Nancy Reagan know that Ronald Reagan was beginning to falter? Did she hide it, and did she exert real presidential power at the time?
Yes, on all three, absolutely. She did not know that he had Alzheimer's, but it was apparent that his mental powers were slipping in the last year, 2 years. And this is really where, I mean, Nancy played an indispensable role throughout his political career, but here she really became indispensable to a Reagan presidency. Doubled her vigilance, and you remember those whispered cues we would pick up from time to time. We're doing our best. That was just the tip of the iceberg. Anybody who tried to sideline Nancy in the White House had a short career, because she was
Donald Reagan?
Donald Reagan,
Gone.
yeah. Treated her as just a wife. Big mistake.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we're going to get lights on or what, but I know you have. Oh, there you. Oh, so good looking.
Gosh, so many people.
So just raise your hand and project. Are there microphones?
Yeah.
Or- There are microphones?
There might. There's this gentleman had his
Okay,
hand up.
go ahead.
Yeah. And
Who?
Mrs.
Okay.
The reason I explain in the book why I don't deal with the Eisenhower's marriage. Quite frankly, it didn't leave much of an imprint on the presidency. Mamie was more the general's lady than first lady, and really didn't have much interest in the substance of. She was really a throwback, and the couples.
I have to tell you one Mamie story, which I just love.
Yeah.
Every morning, she would get herself propped up in bed, and she had her own bedroom. It was very flouncy, very pink, very chintzy, and she'd make a phone call to her mother, who was in the next room in the White House, and she would be up in her bed, and they would talk on the phone every morning. Is that wonderful? It's my Mamie story.
Yeah, it's that gentleman.
Okay, you go. You call. Go ahead.
How did the commander-in-chief come home to mother of his children and say that he sent 50,000 boys into harm's way?
You talking about Lyndon Johnson?
Lyndon Johnson?
About, FDR and Johnson and Nixon a little bit.
Well,
How did they react to that?
first of all, the first lady, whether you're talking about Eleanor or Lady Bird, was usually in the picture throughout the decision making. So it wasn't like, honey, I sent 50,000 to war today. It was a gradual. It was an unfolding decision making process, and I think it was certainly not easy for Roosevelt. You know how long it took us to get to that. You know how carefully FDR crafted our entry into the war. The tragic thing about LBJ is, which we learned from these tapes, is that he thought Vietnam was unwinnable. And but because of a combination of Johnson's own insecurities and his inability to detach, the way I think Kennedy would have been able to just level with the country and detach himself from, LBJ couldn't bear the idea of being the president responsible for the first lost war in American history.
It's true. It's clearly in the tapes.
Yeah.
But I can answer that, and you'll hear it on Sunday when you watch, that Lady Bird's focus was on what this was doing to his mental condition.
Yeah.
Because as he got really sucked into, every time that the Pentagon comes to him on these tapes, they're asking him to double the ground troops. So he goes from 50,000 to 100,000 to 200,000, and it keeps going up. And he's cracking up.
Yeah.
And she writes in her diary, that's also on audio tape, that she's terribly concerned about his moods, his inability to get out of bed, and that's what she worries about.
Well, he wasn't sleeping at night. He asked to be woken for every casualty, every fatality.
In the middle of the night.
In the middle of the night. And that meant that Lady Bird was also not getting any sleep. So it was she called it the miasma, is that how you pronounce it, or miasma? Miasma, which hung over the White House in the last 2 years, and of course ultimately led her to persuade her husband to make that dramatic announcement in 1968, catching the nation off guard: I will not seek nor will I accept my party's nomination for president. And she had a big role to play in that. In fact, if you watch that tape carefully for just a split second, LBJ looks off camera at Lady Bird, and there's that moment of eye contact, which is quite poignant.
Way in the back.
Most of the president's children ended up with multiple problems.
Many of them had a difficult time due to, frankly, neglect. The Roosevelt kids had problems. We know that the Reagan children felt very marginalized in that family. Their son, Ron Reagan, I quote him as saying, when the Alzheimer's was announced, and he was asked, do you miss your father? He said, we never had him. How can we miss something we never had? Which is very sad, I think. We've got to credit the Clintons for raising a terrific daughter, however. She's really the dream daughter. We're watching some of the difficulties that the current occupants in the White House are having with their children.
In some ways, though, this it seems you're going to disagree with me, I think, but this president, the current president, is an accidental president too, because he wasn't headed here by any stretch.
No, I absolutely agree with that.
He wanted to be the baseball commissioner or something like that.
Yeah.
Keep your thoughts to yourself.
I absolutely agree with that. They're singular in the presidency in that they had a total of 6 years in politics, and as governor of a not very consequential, the office. Texas is a consequential state, but the office there is a largely formal ceremonial office.
Would you say that the Trumans were the exception to the rules you laid down? The very, very best, he wasn't in politics, he was about to go into the haberdashery business.
Exactly, right.
She was miserable in the White House.
That's right. No, that's why I categorize the Trumans along with the Fords and perhaps the current couple as accidental presidents.
But I interviewed Laura Bush, and I'll tell you something interesting. I'd never met her before, and the main thing, the strongest quality that you just cannot miss is how calm she is. She just has this incredibly solid center, and you're with her, and there's no twitching. There's just a complete sense of repose and serenity. And I said to her, it just popped out of my mouth, I'll bet you calm him down. And she said, also, that was the attraction. So whatever he was going to go into, he knew he needed somebody beside him who was just going to calm him down.
It was a very intelligent choice on his part.
I have tons of more questions if you don't, because I could go on. Any more?
Well,
I have, can I, do, if
no,
there isn't,
this lady
okay,
has-
go ahead, go ahead.
Well, the influence is directly, the spouse's influence is directly determined by the relationship she has with her husband, not by her objective qualifications for that role. Those of us who are married know that in a good, healthy relationship, there's a great deal of give and take, and it isn't based on whether the spouse has a PhD in political science. It's based on the quality of the interaction. I think that Barbara Bush, for example, who had 1 year of college education, she married George when she was 19. I think she had tremendous effect and influence on him because of personal qualities and things that he lacked that she had. She had the steel and the loyalty meter, the loyalty antenna, I should say, that he didn't have. So they compensate for each other, but these are very human relationships. That's what I try to do in this book, is connect the personal and the political, and make these Rushmore-esque characters into flesh and blood characters like the rest of us, who need good, strong partnerships, perhaps more than most of us, because the White House is such an isolating place. And therefore we can't, whether we like it or not, that they have these, this dependence on their partners is beside the point. They need them.
And I think politics is very much boils down, particularly in the White House, to one, who can he trust? Mm-hmm. Nobody except her. And it's them against the world. Yeah. And they get in kind of a bunker situation, don't
Absolutely.
You think? Almost all of them, except the Nixons. Really.
Which is why I found it astonishing that historians haven't dealt with this subject in a more serious way, with the exception, of course, of Doris Kearns Goodwin and her book on the Roosevelts, No Ordinary Time, which is a wonderful study. Yes. The supposed deal between Bill and Hillary.
Good question.
Well, I come out on the side of it being both a political arrangement and a real marriage. It's most definitely both. Both of them need the other. I quote George Stephanopoulos as saying that each thinks the other is the smartest person they've ever met. And there is no question that neither one could be with someone who wasn't passionate about politics, because that's what they live and breathe. I don't know what else to call a relationship of 3 decades duration of such mutual dependency other than a marriage with a large political component.
How do you explain, because you talked about how most of these politicians are narcissistic, how do you explain their raising Chelsea the way they did, which was with a lot of intensity and attention, which they were able to give so much to?
I think Chelsea represents the best in both of them, and they're devoted to her. And
but where did this? All the other presidents, you know, it was all about me, and they were able to do something different.
Mm-hmm. I think that they're both, for all their well-documented flaws, these are people of substance with genuine qualities and a body of undeniable achievements. And Chelsea, their parenting is I think shows their very best qualities. Right. And I don't think we should take that away from them. And I think, first of all, they have only one child, and it was a difficult birth. And I mean, you all know all this. We know everything about the Clintons, more than about some of our closest friends. And so they really treasure this daughter who does have. I've had occasion to observe her, and I'm very admiring of her poise and her composure and her sense of responsibility for being in the public eye. I don't think she would ever do anything to embarrass her parents, and Doesn't work the other way around sometimes. That would.
Can you see hands? Well, can I ask a final? If there's any more.
Oh wait, there's.
Oh, here's
there's,
someone
oh,
right here.
sorry.
With regard to Chelsea, what effect, I mean, you said that they raised an incredible child.
Yes.
But what effect has all of Bill's behavior, on her?
Well, yeah, we can only imagine how painful that was for her. But she, there's no question that she adores both her parents. Children have this wonderful loyalty and resilience. They do tend to forgive us many things. She certainly played a role in sustaining that family. You remember that picture when Clinton was walking to the helicopter in August '98, flanked by Chelsea, with Chelsea holding, Chelsea holding both her parents. I thought that was an incredibly powerful and symbolic snapshot of her role in keeping it together. But I'm sure that I interviewed the Nixon daughters, and they don't see their father the way we do either.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you about that. They loved him. They love him.
Yeah.
He was so cold, and his wife. I was recently in the White House, and there's one room where all the First Lady's portraits are, and of course Jackie is so elegant. She looks sad, but she's elegant. Lady Bird's the most beautiful in the whole room, and there is Pat Nixon.
Sad.
Oh.
Yeah. Even her portrait is.
Her portrait is just, she's a flower who wasn't being watered.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. No, she.
And
she
those
withered.
girls loved him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is a powerful. Blood is thicker than anything.
All right. Final question. Final question. Oh no. I see one more first. All right. Last one. Then mine. Then we're done.
Well, not. Yeah, there's a book in Presidential Mothers too. I think actually somebody's written that. But a lot of these presidents were mama's boys, and FDR was certainly one. And Eleanor really suffered at the hands of Sarah, who never let them alone, and was a domineering. Really the kind of mother-in-law that we have nightmares about, the rest of us. And she Eleanor ultimately built her own house in part to get away from Sarah. It was not a happy relationship.
Well, I would like to tell you that honestly, this is one of the best reads. And Kati, having studied them, I just wanted her to quickly tell us, if this happened, which was your favorite couple? Which did you really end up admiring and loving the most?
Well, this will come as no surprise that with the Roosevelts, the closer you get, the better they are, because there's such a richness to them, to their story and their characters, and you just can never bottom out with Eleanor and Franklin. They are the gold standard, and I'm hoping that our current president and first lady are dipping into history to learn something of how to conduct the presidency in a time of national upheaval, because the Roosevelts really are exemplary in that regard, in setting the moral tone, and in shepherding us through terrible trauma. And by the way, their marriage was dysfunctional, so. So you can't have everything.
Thank you, Kati.
Thank you, Lesley.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. For more information on the 92nd Street Y, New York, and all of our programs, please visit us at 92ny.org.